Two more sleeps until Arsenal take on PSG in the first leg of our UEFA Champions League semi-final. If you think I'm going to spam your feeds with preview content between now and the big kickoff, you'd be absolutely right. You're listening to the Chronicles of a Gooner, and today I'm going to highlight three things that I believe will be key with regards to how things go on Tuesday night. Let's get into it. Hey everybody, happy Sunday and welcome back to another live episode of the Chronicles of a Gooner podcast with me, your host, Harry Symeou. How you all doing? Hope you're all having a wonderful weekend so far. Nice to have a weekend off, isn't it? I was sort of contemplating what to do this weekend, and sort of as we got closer and closer to it, I realized that actually the worst thing I could possibly do was to sit around all weekend to try and unwind, to try and relax with this PSG game on my mind. I knew I wouldn't be able to disconnect. I knew I wouldn't be able to have a breather. And so I was working yesterday and I traveled down to the South Coast to cover Brighton against West Ham. And I got to be honest, when I was on my way down there, I was thinking, this might not be that good of a game. You know, Brighton have got an outside chance, in my opinion, of making Europe. West Ham United have been, quite frankly, dreadful in recent times. There's been no upturn under Graham Potter. What am I going to see? I'm probably going to see a 0-0 or a 1-1 or something along those lines, something pretty insignificant. Turns out I actually had a cracking day and a cracking game to cover because it was pretty topsy-turvy, really enjoyable match. If you haven't seen Carlos Baleba and Yassin Ayeri's goals from yesterday, check out Match of the Day. Watch them. They were fantastic. And West Ham, who were couple of minutes away from winning the thing, ended up losing it, and it was all a bit too dramatic, I think, for Graham Potter's liking. He was not best pleased in his post-match interview, shall we say that. But look, Arsenal PSG is very, very much on the horizon now, just a couple of sleeps away. And I keep saying it, but this is Arsenal's biggest game in the best part of 2 decades. So there's a lot to be sort of excited about. There's also a bit to be nervous about as well. That's kind of what happens. The bigger the occasion, the bigger the moment, the harder it is to kind of deal with those nerves. We're not professional athletes, right? We don't have the same coping mechanisms as those who have got to the top level clearly do. Because if they didn't have those things, they wouldn't be where they are. I honestly believe that. I think it's one of the things that I probably admire most about sports people at the really highest end. They've obviously got coping mechanisms when it comes to nerves and anxiety and stress and all the rest of it. And we as fans, us mere mortals, we just don't have that, do we? And I'm certainly feeling the pressure already. And it's Sunday. God help me come Tuesday morning. But anyway, look, on today's pod, it's not going to be a particularly long one, but I did want to highlight three things that I think are going to be really key to how the game plays out on Tuesday night. Three things you could say that I'm almost urging you to look out for, because I think, you know, you'll find them quite interesting points and interesting debates. So I guess I want to start with a couple of things from PSG, because listen, we can talk about being the Arsenal, and we've done this in the past where we've gone, no, we're Arsenal, we go and play our game, etc., etc. Yes, agreed. We should play our game. And while I do believe that you do need to compromise a little bit and you need to adjust and tweak a little bit, I don't think you should completely allow your identity to kind of fade and disappear going into a big game like this. PSG will be just as, if not more, worried about us than we are about them. Because in a lot of ways, we're the kind of antithesis of what they want to play against. I'm not saying that our football's not good. I'm not saying that it's dull, but we're really bloody well organized, which is what these teams that, you know, play with that creativity and flair don't want to come up against. We're unlikely to gift them transitional opportunities, because I think that we're going to be quite smart in the way that we set up. You saw it against Real Madrid. I talked about it post the Real Madrid game. Did we leave space in behind? Yes, we did, but we left manageable spaces. We left spaces that were manageable for us, for our goalkeeper, for our centre halves. And as a result of that, we limited Real Madrid over the 2 legs to very, very little. So in a lot of ways, as I say, we're the opposite of what PSG relish. I do think for us, though, what kind of makes this a little bit difficult is that we don't have everything that we'd want. We don't have our full weaponry available to us. And, people will say, well, it's only Thomas Partey, really. You knew that Kai Havertz was going to be out. You knew that Jesus was going to be out. It's literally just Thomas Partey missing. But dig a little deeper, right? It's Thomas Partey missing. It's also Jorginho missing, who would have just been, in a lot of people's eyes, a like-for-like replacement in there. Okay, maybe we'd have had to tweak Declan Rice's role a little bit to help support Jorginho in a game like this. But you get the feeling that had Jorginho been fit and available, we would have gone that way. Marino would have continued up front. So the reason I say dig a little deeper is because this Partey absence, it has a knock-on effect. You're going to be without Partey, which means you have to bring Marino back into the midfield because Jorginho is injured, which means you have to take Marino out of centre forward, which means you have to put Leandro Trossard up front, which isn't a bad thing. I think he's got 4 goals in his last 3 games, but it's different. It's something different. Our approach is going to have to be adjusted as a result of that. So I've been thinking long and hard over the last sort of 24, 48 hours about how our approach, in my opinion, should look. And that led me on to kind of 3 really, I think, key points. And that's what I'm going to share with you guys today. So let me bring up the trusty tactics board. And we're going to talk a little bit about how I think the 2 teams are going to set up in this one. So if we start with Arsenal, I think it will be Raya in goal. I think it will be Lewis Skelly at left back, Kivior and Saliba both at centre half, with Timber playing at right back. I think Declan Rice will drop into the 6th position. I think Marino will come into the left 8 role. Odegaard will play as the right-sided 8. And then I'm expecting it to be Saka and Martinelli playing either side of Leandro Trossard. Now, for PSG, I think it will be Donnarumma in goal. I think it will be Hakimi, Marquinhos, Pacho, and Mendes across the back. I think it will be the midfield trio of João Neves, Vitinha, and Fabian Ruiz. And then I think it will probably be Dembele as the 9, although he's not really a 9. Doué, I think, will probably start. And I think Kvaratskhelia will be the other winger. Now, those 2 will swap. They will rotate. We've seen them do that in their recent Champions League games, so I expect that to happen again. There was a part of me that wondered if Luis Enrique might just change Doué for Barcola just because, or even Kvaratskhelia for Barcola, just because Barcola is someone who's a little bit more defensively useful, I would say, and he's a little bit more, what's the word? He's a little bit more of a system player. And although one of the things I've been really sort of praising PSG for throughout their Champions League run so far has been this, this idea of, we've got a system and we're going to play to it where possible. And, we're going to stay within that, generally speaking, but we're also going to create a structure that empowers the Doués, the Dembeles, the Kvaratskhelia to go off and do what they do best, which is cause absolute mayhem in the opposition's half and in the final third in particular. So, I'm sitting here and I'm saying, Barcola might come in because they might adapt. Listen, I think it's respect. It's respect to not completely change your game and rip up your game plan, but to look at teams at this stage of the competition and say, I have to be wary of what their strengths are. I have to try and nullify some of those strengths, and I have to try and expose some of their weaknesses. It's not veering away from your philosophy. It's not throwing your philosophy in the bin. It is respect for the fact that you're coming up against another very good team. And this works both ways, by the way. We're coming up against a very good PSG side. They know that they're coming up against an Arsenal side that just thumped Real Madrid over 2 legs by 5 goals to 1. So there's going to be adjustments from both managers. This might be a lot cagier than people anticipate. We will see, of course, but I just wanted to highlight these 3 points. So those are what I expect the 2 lineups to be. Now, obviously, we're recording this before we've had any press conferences, before we've had any clear updates. But one of the things that worries me, so this is number 1, is PSG and what I expect them to do down their right-hand side. I expect to see a Paris Saint-Germain overload on their right-hand side, our left-hand side, for a number of reasons. So I want to highlight a couple of players first and foremost. I've been blown away by how good these 2 guys have been in sort of recent games, particularly in the Champions League, particularly against Real Madrid. But I'd be lying if I said that what we saw against Real Madrid has taken away any fear or any concern that I have around Arsenal's left side defensively. Jakub Kiwior is going through a really, really good period of form. He looks better than he's ever looked in an Arsenal shirt, but he's not William Saliba. And probably more importantly, he's not Gabriel Magalhaes. Miles Lewis-Skelly has looked bold, has looked brave, has looked confident, and has been a massive part of our success in this competition so far, particularly against Real Madrid. But he was shaky against PSV in the round before. And I do think if I was an opposition manager, I'd be looking at him and going, he's the one. Not just because I think that, obviously naturally he's not a left back, but partly because he does like to drift. And that is obviously a part of our game plan. I'm not pinning that on him and saying if he goes roaming and he loses the ball and we get done, it'll all be his fault, because it's clearly an instruction from the manager. But if I'm PSG, I'm looking at Arsenal's left-hand side and I'm saying that's where I hurt them. Now, having to play Declan Rice at 6 means that we have to bring Mikel Merino probably into the left 8 position. And this poses a bit of a problem when we're talking about this right-hand side of PSG's. Now, let me just highlight what I mean. Whether it's Desiree Doué or Kvaratskhelia out there or Bradley Barcola, the same thing applies, okay? They've got Doué there. They've got Hakimi, who comes up and down the pitch like a steam train. We saw that in the game that we played against them in the league phase here. And perhaps even more worryingly is that fact that Dembele, when he does drift from centre forward, he tends to drift out to the right-hand side. So all of a sudden, you can end up very easily in this kind of 3-on-2 situation where Kiwior and Lewis-Skelly are both pinned back. Hakimi's coming up on the right-hand side. You got to be mindful and wary of him. Of course, you expect Martinelli to come back with him and do the work. So that makes it 3-on-3, but it's still 3-on-3 against 3 very talented, very skillful, and very, very tricky players. And normally, I would say, well, this is where the left 8 has to drop back and support and help. But Mikel Merino has other uses, and we have other needs for Mikel Merino, in my opinion, which I'm going to come on to a little bit later. Add to that, I don't think he can cover the ground in the same way that Declan Rice can. And all of a sudden, that side of the pitch, it does concern me. They're going to target Kiwior, they're going to target Lewis-Skelly, because regardless of how good their performances have been in recent weeks, they are still the ones in this team that you would highlight as the potential areas of success if you're Paris Saint-Germain. I've talked about Martinelli's ability to support. I've said it before. I think that's one of the reasons that he's in the team, regardless of what his form's like in front of goal. But there's a part of me that wants to see him high up the pitch. And so at times, you're almost going to see this, I think, fascinating game of chicken between Martinelli and Hakimi. You're going to have Martinelli at times wanting to stay high, Hakimi going with him, but there'll be times when Hakimi goes, at some point, they've got to leave each other to their own devices, right, in order to gain those advantages. So if you're Hakimi, you're going to have to fly forward to help your team, but that means leaving Martinelli behind. And if you're Gabriel Martinelli, you're going to want to stay high and wide for your team, but that means you're going to allow Achraf Hakimi to get forward and join in with those attacks. So it's going to be a bit of a game of chicken. Honestly, I really do feel that way. So that's an interesting facet to the game. I also think that Miles Lewis-Skelly, one of the great things he's done is come inside, carry the ball, pass the ball, progress it through the lines. Is he going to do that as frequently against Paris Saint-Germain, knowing what we know, talking about that threat that they have down the right-hand side? So this is something that I would say look out for. PSG's overload on their right, Arsenal's left, Hakimi, Doué, Kvaratskhelia, Dembele, depending on who it is that plays out there. That is, in my opinion, where if I'm Luis Enrique, I'm looking to hurt this Arsenal team. That is the area of the pitch that I think I can have the greatest success in, and that is the area of the pitch that I would be targeting. So let's see how that goes. I think I've accidentally deleted Jakub Kiwior off my tactics board, have I? Yeah, let's just replace him. Shocking. I told you I'm bad with technology. Anyway, so that's not thing number one to look out for. We'll bring you some more analysis. Short pause. We'll be right back with number 2. Okay, let's stick to the theme of PSG, and then we'll come on to Arsenal afterwards. PSG's midfield dynamism is one of their biggest strengths. Okay, I think they've got three incredibly talented ball players in Vitinha sitting at the base, in Joao Neves, and in Fabian Ruiz. But I think physically is where we have the edge here. And I'm not talking about distances covered. They can cover distances. They can get around the pitch. They're pretty snappy guys. They might not be the biggest, with the exception of Fabian Ruiz. And I think that's maybe where Arsenal need to try and just adjust and tweak their approach, so that that physical advantage that we have can sort of come through. I think it's really, really important. I think if you try and go toe to toe with their midfield in terms of ball playing, particularly with the fact that we've got no Thomas Partey, so we'll be having Declan Rice sitting at the base, assuming that's the way that Mikel goes, and then you're going to have, Mikel Merino and an out of sorts Martin Odegaard, which is what he is right now. I think if you try and go toe to toe with them football wise, you probably don't come out on top. I think they can play around you. I think they can play through you. I think they're really patient when they need to be. I think they're really intelligent. They all look after the ball really, really well. So I think we've got to bypass the midfield at times in this game. So how do Arsenal go about doing that and essentially nullifying PSG's dynamism in midfield? I think it's quite simple. I think at times we're going to have to take a little bit of a risk and a little bit of a gamble. And what that gamble and that risk consists of is, I think when we want to get forward, particularly in transitional situations, this is probably the way to do it. I want to see Martinelli and Saka just drop back a little bit to make up a part of that midfield. I want to see, if we do go with the Rice and Odegaard and Merino midfield, I want to see Odegaard just drop that little bit deeper to sit alongside Declan Rice. And when we win the ball back in a transitional situation, Mikel Merino, you need to get on your bike. You need to get forward. You need to get as close to Leandro Trossard as possible. And Arsenal need to go over the top of that PSG midfield and hit Merino so that he can flick it on, knock it down, bring it under control. And that's the way I think we get at their back four, by bypassing that midfield. Not through it, not around it, because I think they're all really good players. And I think they're really clever players. And I think if you try and go toe-to-toe football-wise with them, particularly without our best midfield, I think you end up maybe losing out there. So for me, you go over the top. And that means that when we win the ball back in a transitional situation, Merino has to be on his bike early. And everybody else in that Arsenal team needs to know that you need to go over the top of that midfield and hit him. He can win duels against Marquinhos. He can win duels against Pacho, Hakimi, Mendes. Who says Hakimi and Mendes are even going to be back if we're talking about transitional situations? Because we know that they love to fly down that right and left-hand side. So that's how I would look to get around PSG's midfield. Not through it, over the top of it. And once you play that ball into Mikel Merino, that's the trigger point for Martinelli, who are going to have to, and Saka, who are going to have to put in a lot of running on Tuesday night to get going, to go. Get on their bikes, get as close to the forward play as possible. Don't try and play through them, because if we had Thomas Partey in the team, I'd look at this quite differently, because I think he's a wonderful progressive passer. I don't think we have that level of progressive passer anywhere in our midfield now, certainly from those deeper positions now that he's absent. So this is the way that I would look to bypass their really dynamic midfield. It is a gamble at times, because you're going to push Merino up high and he's not always going to get it. And that means if you lose it and they come back at you, then you're a midfielder down. But Odegaard's going to have to drop deep and support Declan Rice. And I do think we've seen Martin Odegaard drop a lot deeper in recent times than he has done previously. It's not necessarily worked, you would argue, because his game hasn't been as good this season. But I don't think he's uncomfortable doing that. So I think it's something structurally we can accommodate. And I think it's something that we should look to do. Right, on to number 3, my third and final point of the pod. Look out for how Declan Rice plays the 6 role. This is going to be fascinating, because for me, there's been this ongoing debate for a long, long time about Declan Rice. Is he a 6? Is he an 8? Where do you play him? What's his best position? Blah, 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 blah. Well, come Tuesday night, we don't really have a choice. Declan Rice, for me, has to play at 6. Can he play 6? Absolutely. Do I have any worries or concerns about him defensively? No. Do I have concerns about him offensively? Not really, because I don't look at my number 6 as the key player in kind of my offensive build-up and patterns of play. But I do think one of the things that's going to be important, if I'm talking about those transitional situations that we mentioned in part 2, we need to move the ball into our forward line quickly, really quickly. And one of the things I've always felt we've lacked when Partey's not played at the 6 is that ability to get the ball into the feet of Saka and Martinelli early. And I think early is so important. It's the key, because you get the ball to Saka early, he's got a one-on-one versus the fullback. You delay getting the ball into Bukayo Saka, more often than not, he's probably got 2-3 men to try and work around. So I think for me, getting the ball into those guys early is really important. Now, the reason I'm focusing on and highlighting Declan Rice's role at the 6 is because I don't think, as for all the brilliance that Declan Rice possesses, and believe me, don't take this as I don't rate the player. I think he's an awesome player, but I don't think he's Thomas Partey. They've got different skill sets. That's probably why Mikel's gone the way he's gone, generally speaking, with Partey at the 6 and Rice in that slightly more advanced left 8 role. Partey is a passer. Rice is a carrier. It's not a criticism. It's a difference in the way that they play the game. And no matter how quick you carry the ball across the field, no matter how strong you are in doing so, you will never get the ball into people as early as you could if you passed it by carrying it. It just doesn't happen. It doesn't work. So again, people would probably argue and push back on this and go, well, why can't Declan Rice carry the ball forward then? Well, he can. But the problem is that if your 6 is the guy that's carrying the ball forward and you lose possession, you don't have a 6 anymore to protect the back 4. So I think Declan Rice is going to have to really take on a lot of instruction going into this game. And he's going to have to understand that he can't play the 6 role in the way that he would play the 6 role against most other teams, because PSG are not most other teams. They're a top side with fantastic players, with a midfield that will play through you, that are super dynamic, with a forward line packed full of skill and ability and technique and unpredictability. You can't do that against them. So for me, we're going to have to figure out another way of maybe progressing the ball, because if Declan Rice isn't going to play those passes wide and into Merino, if he gets up alongside Trossard early enough, just because it doesn't come as naturally to him as it does to Thomas Partey, then we've got to figure out another way of getting the ball early. And I think Declan Rice being able to clip balls forward is a much more realistic ask than asking him to thread it through these tight spaces like Thomas Partey does to find players. I keep saying it, that getting the ball into the wingers is really, really important. But just generally speaking, the whole dynamic of our midfield looks different. Merino can threaten like Rice can in the final third. We've all seen that recently. And we're hoping, by the way, that Mikel Merino's fit, because obviously he missed the Crystal Palace game. But we now, by moving Merino into midfield, lose that ability to hit the front man early with a long ball forward, because Leandro Trossard, he might run down the sides more. He's just as good a finisher. He might pop up in the box, get on the end of a cutback, drift left, and open a corridor for Martinelli or Saka to come in field. He can do all of those things for sure. But it's not the same. And so regardless of how good you think Declan Rice is, and believe me, I think he's very bloody good, he's going to have to play the game differently to the way he would normally play it. He's going to have different responsibilities and a different role, essentially, playing as a number 6. What he's done so well recently is carry, drive forward. You can't do that necessarily when you're the number 6, because of the vulnerability that then creates going the other way. And I think that Mikel Arteta will be shit hot on this, because yeah, of course, we'd love to win the first game at Emirates Stadium and put ourselves in a similar position to the one we found ourselves in when we went to the Bernabeu. But I don't think it's going to go like that. I think it's going to be a lot tighter. I think it's going to be a lot cagier. And I think it could turn out to be a low-scoring, very sort of chess match type of encounter. So we'll see, right? But that was my point on Declan Rice. Have a look and pay attention to how Declan Rice plays the 6, because if Declan Rice plays the 6 and doesn't adjust, I think we might have a problem. I think he needs to adjust. And so when I said I was going to pick out 3 things that I thought were really going to impact how this game went, That is certainly for me one of them. So let me just reiterate those points. PSG's overload on the right-hand side is number one. Can Arsenal cope with that? They're going to attack us down our left-hand side. I'm sure of it, with Lewis Skelly and Kivior being seen as the two weaker players, if you like. Hakimi will get forward. Doué will probably play on the right-hand side. At times, you'll see Kvaratskhelia going over there as well, for sure. If he starts, maybe Bradley Barcola plays. Who knows? But you will see Dembele drift as well, which will cause us problems. So they will try and generate that overload. How do we combat that? Do we move our 6 over there? Do we make Martinelli come back a lot more, but then we lose his impact high up the pitch? Do we drop Mikel Merino back that little bit deeper to help out and support? That's going to be key, I think, to how this game goes. Now, we offer all of these same threats, of course, and PSG have to figure out a way of neutralizing us. But ultimately, these are things that we need to be aware of and we need to consider. So first thing I'm going to be looking out for is how Arsenal cope with what I expect to be a PSG overload down their right, our left. The second thing is PSG's midfield dynamism. If we get into a tiki-taka midfield match with them, we lose because they've got better ball players, in my opinion, particularly with the absence of Thomas Partey. So we've got to go, in my opinion, rather than through their midfield, over the top of it. That's how I would approach it. And if we get that right, I think it can be super, super effective. And the third thing is how Declan Rice plays the 6 role. He needs to adapt. He needs to adjust. We need to have a structure around him that will allow him to play in the way that we feel is the right way to nullify this PSG midfield. Defensively, I have no concerns about him. But if he goes roaming, which is his way of progressing the ball, that could leave us exposed. So maybe we're going to have to limit Declan Rice a little bit in terms of what he's got the license to do. And that hasn't been the way in recent times. So that might be a bit of an adjustment and something he finds difficult to adapt to. But anyway, those are my 3 things. Thank you so much for tuning in. We'll take plenty of your questions on Monday's episode. But I thought I'd get a Sunday one out for you as well, seeing as there's a pretty big game coming up in a few days' time. If you want to check out another preview of the game, myself and Adrian Clark recorded one on Friday. You guys seem to have really enjoyed that. So thank you for tuning in and for all your support there. It's the last podcast in the feed. It's the last episode on the channel. And if you want to support us by becoming a patron, you can do so. Patreon.com/The Chronicles of Aguna. The link is in the description below. Before I go, if you haven't done so already, leave a like on this video. Subscribe to the channel if you're new. And I will see you all very, very soon on the next episode of The Chronicles of Aguna. Probably not going to sleep till Tuesday.